Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on parent or peer parent support, evolution, promises, and challenges of implementation within a wraparound context. Our presenters today are Patricia Miles and Tony Donnelly, and we'll get started with our presenters in just a few moments. But I did want to go ahead and review some Adobe details before we get started. We have a very large group joining us today, and so all of your lines are muted. And so if you have any questions or comments throughout the presentation, please go ahead and post that in the public chat box. If you look right below the public chat box, you'll see the files box where you're able to download a PDF copy of today's presentation. And of course, to the left of that is the actual presentation. We are recording today's presentation, so you will have the opportunity to view this post-webinar via the TA Network's YouTube channel. And so everyone who registered will receive a link to that post once this has been edited and put up on the YouTube channel. So again, if you have any questions about the content for today throughout the webinar, please go ahead and use that public chat box. If you're having any audio issues or any technical issues, please also use that public chat box to communicate anything that you're any issues that you're having. And so without further ado, I'll go ahead and pass it off to our presenters for today to get us started.
Thank you, Tara. This is Tony Donnelly. Pat and I are really excited to be with you all today. Here are our learning objectives. Today we're going to be talking about different eras of peer parent support within the wraparound history. We'll share with you what the 5 stages of the parent journey are, and then we're going to identify promises and challenges implementing peer parent support within a wraparound context. So here on this slide, you'll see we have 4 peer support applications. There's peer parent support in the children's system. There's youth peer support and transition age support in both the children's and adult system. We have adult peer-to-peer support and adult family support. And for today's webinar, we are focusing on parent peer support. So within system involvement, there are various opportunities for parents to become involved. That one aspect is in a formal role of peer parent support, and then we also have parent involvement and parent leadership. All 3 of these opportunities require lived experience as a parent or caregiver, but only one of these roles, which is peer parent support, is a paid formal service delivery. And so you'll see there are different paths for each one of those areas around parent involvement. Pretty much they're the decision maker within their own child and family team. They may informally give support to families around them. And parent leadership, they use their lived experience to influence policy and decision making at a variety of levels within the system. So we have our first question for you in terms of polling. And in your site, would you identify which of the 3 types of parent roles that you think have most evolved, whether it be peer parent support, parent involvement, parent leadership, or something other than that? All right, it looks like that most of us are agreeing that somewhere around 81, 82% believe that peer parent support is what has evolved the most over the past 20, 25 years.
So this is Pat. I'm up next, right, Tony?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So a couple things about that last slide Tony showed you. The poll is interesting because I think probably both Tony and I would make the argument that in order to have any of the 3 kind of opportunities, you want to make sure that all 3 of them are built into your system. So it's kind of an interesting, it's an interesting result. That we would make the argument that if you wanted to have robust peer parent support, you'd also need to have a system that is highly invested in parent involvement and parent leadership as well. And so we see those three things all linked and often are confused. And then to add more confusion to it, what's often happened is we've added peer-parent support to the wraparound process. And this slide, one of the questions that came back to Tony and I when we were planning for this was, well, what type of wraparound are you talking about? Which caused us to have to think a minute and realize that there are many kind of ways that wraparound is implemented and framed. For the purposes of today, we're defining wraparound as a collaborative planning process that involves a team of people from 4 sectors, including first and foremost the family, also their extended support, community, and systems that get together, make decisions that create a customized plan of care that builds on family, community, and system strengths while addressing prioritized needs of family members, that produces this idea of a customized plan of care that coordinates a range of support, intervention, services, and community opportunities that produce outcomes for families that reflect their hopes and dreams and interests, and is directed by who the family is. So for the purposes of today, that's what we're talking about when we're talking about wraparound. It was a planning process rather than a distinct type of service. When we think about wraparound, we tend to think about wraparound from how it looks from the family. And so this next slide identifies the stages of wraparound from the family's experience. Many wraparound projects will do a very detailed description of the implementation of wraparound from the people doing the implementation. But we were interested in how does it look from the other side of the counter. And so our frame is around, at the front end of wraparound, it looks like a hello, a warm welcome. Moving to actually developing a plan, it's about how do we get the right responses that provide support for families. And then the healing is about how do we keep doing the right things that produce an outcome that ultimately end up with a family having a sense of hope and feeling like they can, and expectancy that they can look forward. When we think about, from my perspective, when we think about peer-parent support and wraparound, they are both extraordinarily complex activities that don't just happen by wishing it to be true. So when I think about it, wraparound, you could spend your entire career trying to figure out how to do a great job and a reliable job implementing wraparound. The truth is we could also do that with peer-parent support. And it's probably no mistake, but historically those two things have come together because wraparound and peer-parent support feel compatible. You know, what are the components that make them compatible? What does peer-parent support bring to the table? The first thing is the idea of connected compassion, that it's not about just having empathy. It's about having this idea of connection with that compassion. I see you, I know you, and I can relate to your story, as well as the ability to strategically self-disclose. And the idea that connected disclosure reduces isolation, shame, and self-blame. But as I stated, having both wraparound and peer-parent support and connected together without thinking through it can cause some unplanned challenges. And some of the things we've seen is we see some confusion with peer-parent support with system of care involvement. So Tony's slide where she talked about those four components or opportunities for parents is a really good example. You could have any one of those. That doesn't mean you have the other two. The other thing that we see is that confusing peer-parent support with family involvement. You can have a really robust set of peer support providers and not have a system based on family involvement. And then the same thing is true with wraparound as we stop to think about it. And so linking those two things together can be quite challenging. I mean, you've got very big ideas and a lot of talent and skill that is embedded in doing both a good job of wraparound and a good job of delivering the right type of support in the right way for families. And so I don't know, Tony, if you want to add anything more to that?
No, Pat, I think that's good. I'm good.
Okay. So I guess we've got another poll at this point. Is that correct? So
yes, we do.
If folks could take a look at this, our question was, what services to peer-parent support provide in your organization, community, or state? It's what we do in Wraparound. It's a feature of our program. Everybody gets it. We wait for a parent to ask for it or need it, or we don't offer that. So if folks could take a few minutes and answer that, that would be great. So has everyone had a chance to, if everyone's had a chance to vote, from this slide, there's some really good news from my perspective. One is that nobody said we don't offer peer-parent support. So that makes us pretty happy because we feel like being able to connect with another parent when you're going through extraordinary circumstances with your children, it's a really good idea to have support. So we're kind of happy about that. It's also interesting that it's a pretty close split between the first and the second one. So if we can move to the next slide. So this is the history of peer-parent support and wraparound is always interesting to me, and I'm speaking as a wraparound elder, and I can say that, but I'd rather the rest of you didn't call me that. Where did this come from? Because from my perspective, as somebody's kicked around wraparound for it feels like 100 years, how did these two pretty dramatic movements get connected to one another? And one of the stories I like to tell is the first time I really saw those things organized was actually in the early 90s, integrated in one wraparound site. But it wasn't by design, it was by opportunity. An employee quit, said, I don't want to do wraparound. And the remaining employees said, well, why don't we take that money and hire the parents that we're trying to work with to support each other, because that seems to be what's missing. From my perspective, what got really, really interesting to me was when I went back several months later to look at their wraparound plans. By having peer-parent support built in from the get-go, I noticed that their plans were much more robust in terms of the whole family, and that parents had opportunities to consider and think about their own situation and their own wellness, and that was interesting to me. Then I started to see more and more parents built in as at the delivery level in the mid-90s. What I saw prior to that was a lot of work around parents being built in at a leadership level, but not on the ground where the service was being offered. Then we started to see some things start to happen because people were interested in those early pilots, and we saw a statewide lawsuit requirement from Arizona. They were going through a lawsuit where they said, we want to have these family support partners built into service delivery. And then we really saw peer-parent support move out from under the wraparound umbrella. And right around 2010, we started to see people talking about that as a distinct and discrete set of opportunities for families to find their own healing, which has also coincided with the time when we started to see different types of peer-parent support, as Tony's slide talked about earlier. So there's a history here, but the history wasn't always by design, it was by opportunity. And so for folks that are implementing, it's interesting to think about if you've got frustrations, because both of these are complex things to implement. Part of that is because it's a model that is growing and is really based more in the field than in the laboratory. it wasn't the most elegant design, although it's working out that way, and it provides a great deal of opportunity. And I think you're on for the next slide, Tony.
Okay, so when we talk about the current state of peer parent support, we see what we call some promising applications for this, and then some of the challenges that are also associated with that. And so when we think about peer parent support, we're seeing multiple types and greater acceptance of the role across the country as sites are implementing peer parent support. One of the challenges, though, around peer parent support is sometimes it's viewed as a secondary service rather than a critical and essential standalone service component within the service delivery system, and that this role can actually exist within any child serving system. One of the other promising factors is there's expanded funding opportunities that are targeted specifically for peer parent support. Some of the challenges around that, again, is that this patchwork quilt idea of funding opportunities. And sometimes the purpose can get lost based on funding requirements. Another promising idea around this is the growing recognition of intrinsic value of peer parent support, that it really does make a difference in terms of enhancing the family's well-being. And that one of the challenges around that is past implementation can limit independence. And so the other promising feature around this is an expanded workforce for parents with career ladders. So we're hoping that over time, there's expanded roles, supervisory roles, program management roles, director of a program that could all be a career ladder for parents to walk through. And then one of the challenges around this is sometimes there's confusion around peer support versus family support, and we'll be addressing that in a few upcoming slides. Here are some other unique aspects of peer parent support. It's focused on the parent as a person rather than the parent as a role. So by design, we want to focus on not just who the parent is as the parent or primary caregiver of the individual, but what are that parent's hopes and dreams? Oftentimes the challenge around this is it's housed in the children's system, and the parent is often seen as the primary caregiver rather than a person. And we've seen that sometimes even in team meetings when individuals will focus on calling the parent by their role, whether it's mom or dad or a primary caregiver. We also talked about focusing on the parent's experience rather than their child's story. So here's this opportunity for unrelenting focus on the parent and their experience rather than having the parent's experience be clouded or buried around their concerns for their child. So we're really talking there about some authentic, purposeful, and intentional peer parent support. And again, this design about communicating authentic acceptance, even when we may disagree with the family that we're supporting decisions. And so a skilled peer parent support partner really knows the difference between acceptance and agreement and can articulate that both in meetings with other team members and really help team members understand the parent's perspective rather than needing to focus on getting the parent to behave in a certain way as opposed to really listening to understand their experience. So here in this slide, we're talking about peer parent support or family support. And I think Pat and I would both say that both of these are very, very important services. Family support is everyone's business, no matter what role that you're holding within the system. To make a slight difference, though, peer parent support is the work of parents who have lived experience and are prepared to use their personal life experience with their own family in making connections with other families and helping them feel listened to and heard, and also to benefit them as they walk through their own journeys. When we talk about family support, everyone should be supportive of families. It's just that those of us who have lived experience use that as part of our job. So we make our private story public in an effort to support families so they don't feel isolated, blamed, or shamed. So here we're at another survey question. And this one is about, in your wraparound project, how are peer parent support partners made available within your site? And you'll see we have some listings there by referral. We hire them within our own project. Our larger organization has it, or we deal with it when a parent brings it up. So in discussing, as you're polling there and answering those questions, in discussing peer parent support partners, we're actually referring to parents who are in a permanent caregiving relationship with their child and have lived experience navigating complex behavioral health systems, whether they've done that successfully or not on behalf of their child. And it's also living with a child's behavioral health diagnosis. So it looks like some of the polling is just about finished, and it's exciting to see that no one put, we deal with it when the parent brings it up. So that's really awesome that we're not waiting for families when they hear about peer parent support from someone else, that's when we're going to implement it. It looks like most sites are hiring them within their projects, so there's an intentional opportunity to provide support as one of your service array, and then about another 38% of you are saying you offer peer parent support by referral, and that referral can come from another agency, I'm imagining, or from your own programs and that house peer parent support as well, and you'll send a referral internally for peer parent support. So I don't know about you, Pat, but I do like these survey results as well. Very, very promising.
So
Pat,
yeah, I think I'm on now. Is that right? Okay. So when we think about peer parent support and wraparound, as I talked about, they're both very complex, and even though they seem breathtakingly simple, and some of the challenges we've seen in wraparound and peer parent support being integrated. Number one is this idea of focus on the family, that we can get so focused on the family we may lose the parent perspective. That can be a challenge. The second thing is this heavy focus on support. Is, one of the things that Wraparound is very good at is integrating both formal service and community experiences, but that integration takes a lot of energy, and what may fall away is a very distinct need for support, especially in an environment where we're doing a good job with Wraparound, which we all hope would be supportive from the get-go. I think the third thing is the result focus can be a challenge in terms of that heavy focus on outcome for kids. People who end up working in wraparound will have a strong sense about what needs to happen for young people, and of course parents share that concern. So we often we run the risk of missing the support needs along the journey that parents may have in order to produce the outcome, and then the integration. Peer parent support, when done well and with purpose and as a discrete service, is a very complex set of steps, as is wraparound. And when we try to put the two together, one of the things that can happen is that we can end up getting so busy with both of them, one may be sacrificed. And it's this phenomena that you may see and you may experience. I see a number of the participants are people who are delivering peer parent support in a wraparound context. You find yourself thinking more about wraparound inputs than support inputs, and it's easy to get caught up in that. A way of thinking about peer parent support in terms of making sure that we've got the right root system for it is to really think about peer parent support has to be grounded in the parent's experience. And so we want to be careful about not turning that into our concerns about the family or the child, but say when a young person in a family goes through something, the truth of the matter is so does their parent, and both parties have unique needs for support. If your child gets a diagnosis, the question starts to become that we want to consider is what's that like for you as the parent? The second thing is that peer parent support can live anywhere in the system. So I do worry a bit if it becomes something so anchored to wraparound that across the systems we're missing the opportunity to see the power of peer support for people that are going through a different kind of pathway. The other thing that can happen, I think, is that we can lose the idea of peer parent support being a purposeful thing rather than than being a symbolic person. And what I mean by that is that we want to start thinking about peer support as a very powerful and potent service that has a purpose and a direction that it's trying to go to. And then finally, we want to think about a logic model. What's the big idea? Peer parent support is not just an add-on. It is a powerful way to help parents on their journey so that they can experience a better sense of outcome as they move forward. So that gets us to how do we think about the parent's journey, because what we believe is that when families enter systems, the parent's experience is, while it's always related to the child, it's also quite distinct from the child's experience. And because of our concerns about the child, part of what can happen is we can lose the parent's experience. And so we use this metaphor of the hero's journey, partially because Tony and I like to read heroic stories, and it's really about kind of what happens in the traditional hero story is that people are in one world and they end up leaving that world to enter services, and then if they're lucky, they find a partner from the system who acts as a guide, and they go through lots of experiences that maybe they weren't prepared for. But if all things work out well, people go to they return to their ordinary world with a different way of seeing the world. As Tony and I have worked together over the years, one of the things we were interested in is how could we break out the parent's journey as a unique experience. And so what you see on your slide is what we call the parent's journey, which kind of talks about the experience that parents go through. That when they really start on this system of care journey, the first stage is that they become defined by the situation in front of them. It's not unusual to hear parents say, I worried about this, and then things got bigger, or maybe the school called, or I realized I needed to get this assessment done. And there's a moment when that happens, when you say this story is a little bit bigger than what I expected it to be. I think that we've seen that as a very commonplace. The second stage that parents will go to is to the recognition that they're now part of a system. Whether or not they wanted to be part of that system is something different, but it's really about, I recognize that I will be engaged with this system, sometimes to a really good result, other times to a less than good result, but I'm now part of a system, and that means that the ways I talk about the circumstances that are part of what's going on with my son or daughter are often different. The third stage that we see parents go through is this growing realization that they have to act for their family, on behalf of their family. And then over time, parents will start to talk about understanding the meaning behind their experience and ultimately landing with committing to help others through their experience. This was a way for us to think about the parent's experience. You know, in all of those stages, they may be going through all kinds of things with their son or daughter. If it's in a wraparound context, wraparound may be heading down those 4 stages we talked about earlier, and the parent may be in a very different stage in terms of where they're at with their own journey. And so we've used the parent journey as a way to really call out the parent's experience as we move forward. The idea of the parent journey is that it's really focused on the parent or the caregiver's experience, and recognizing that parents often move back and forth as circumstances come up. But it can be used as a way to think about the peer support provider's lived experience as well as what the parent's going through to create the right size pathways for understanding in order to identify the right amount of support and the right approach to support for the person that you get to support. It also, from a professional perspective, it can create an opportunity for professionals to work as an ally to peer parent support partners. It moves us away from what are we going to do about this circumstance to recognize that within the family the parent is also going and needs and deserves support for the unique situation they're going through. I don't know, Tony, if you want to add anything to that. So the takeaway from this section, from my perspective, is really about the parents on their own journey, regardless of where the system's journey is. And I know that it can be, we can get focused on helping the parent get on where we all need to go so we can be on the same page. But the first thing we have to understand is that journey is quite unique. The second thing is that wraparound has its own milestones and pathways. And so wraparound may be in stage 3 of the process, but the parent may be in stage 1 of their process. And so when we hire peer parent support partners in a wraparound context, we have to be careful and mindful about not giving those peer parent support partners some of the tasks of wraparound in a way that takes away from that unique parent journey. What can happen is we get so busy doing wraparound that we lose the idea of support and recognizing that parents are on this really quite profound and remarkable journey. So, Tony, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add about that section.
No, Pat, I think you've touched on everything. So I'm going to move on to the survey question then. And this is something that we're curious about is what kind of training is provided for peer parent support partners within your wraparound project? Or do they receive training in the wraparound process? Do they get training specific to their role as a PPSP? Are you doing both of those things? And we're looking at some live results here. And again, I'm really pleased to see, and I'm sure, Pat, you are too, that over 53% say we provide both. And I think that's really important. So not only are they being trained in the wraparound process, peer parent support partners, because they have the word parent in their title, doesn't necessarily mean that they have the skills to provide intentional and purposeful peer parent support. And so I know it's a passion of mine and of Pat's that peer parent support partners have training that is grounded in their roles so that they can provide intentional peer parent support and really lead the parent on a process where they feel more confident in their capacity to parent and to really just achieve all of the goals that they hope and dream for their family. Okay, we can move to the next slide. So in talking about peer parent support and training, one solution that we have to offer is what we call the PEARLS approach. And so what we noticed in terms of challenges and implementation, there was a high focus on the peer parent support partner's personality rather than their skill set. And so oftentimes when they are within other program operations, there was an over-assimilation with, say, wraparound or system of care tasks rather than really understanding and focusing on the healing role of peer parent support and the power of that in terms of how it can impact parents and families. Our skill-focused solution to that was the establishment of these core competencies or meta skills that later, after we decided on these 6 competencies, that really formed the mnemonic device PEARLS. And so in that, basically the foundation for that is that it's just a simple framework to be mindful of establishing peer-based relationships, and in that context, being able to use your story in a way that is healing and beneficial to the parent. We know that parents have the most intimate knowledge around their children, so the second skill set was really encouraging parents to be able to grow as a peer, and for our peer parent partners not to think that they are the expert working with that family, but another peer encouraging that peer to continue to grow in their own decision making. And then this ability to provide active acceptance and to be able to communicate that. Again, the ability to distinguish between agreement and acceptance, or disagreement and acceptance. And then to be able to positively hold peers that they're supporting with respect in each and every interaction with their families. And then the fifth skill is linking with others in collaborative problem solving. So while a peer parent support partner may be functioning independently, they are also connected to other team members and will share information. So there's a lot of opportunities to link together in that fashion. And then last but not least, oftentimes families are blamed for their children's mental health challenges or behaviors. And so a skill set that we think is really important to focus on is to suspend and interrupt bias and blame whenever it occurs. We believe bias is learned and unintentional, and so if it's learned, it can also be unlearned. And we also focus on even interrupting parent self-bias as it occurs. And we use these opportunities not as gotcha moments, but as teaching moments to foster deeper understanding of what a parent might be going through. Pat, did you want to add anything to this slide?
Yeah. So the idea of pearls, what we found is in traveling from site to site and different applications that Tony and I both had an opportunity to work on, it's been a bit of a challenge because the task and the context, depending on where people are hired, can drive the work. And so we wanted a more generalized kind of approach to say what are the core skills that associate with being able to deliver effective peer-to-peer support, especially for parents on that parent journey. And we wanted something that people could remember, and then we wanted something that we could remember, hence the pearls. But we felt like as headings of a set of meta skills or things that have to come down from there, this was a way to create and hold the idea that peer-to-peer support is a powerful healing thing, even outside of a wraparound context, so that it doesn't get caught up in whatever the contractual requirements or other kinds of things that are going on can happen. And so this has actually been quite helpful for us in terms of holding that view that even when the wraparound project hires a peer-parent support, the peer-parent support provider has a set of responsibilities and pathways that they themselves must follow in order to get to where they need to go.
Okay, thanks, Pat. The only other thing I would add to this is when we talk about what we consider high-quality peer-parent support, we'd like to be able to see these 6 meta skills in each and every interaction with the parent. So for a skilled PPSP, we'd like to see evidence of that, of these 6 skills in their work with families. And so again, just this idea about the parent journey and pearls in terms of correlation, you can think of the parent journey, or I like to think of it as a mirror for self-reflection for the peer-parent support partner, and also a window for understanding the parent's experience. And so, you know, in our work across the country, one of the things that I've noticed over time is that peer-parent support partners may sometimes distance themselves from their story. They are not, you know, they've been there, they've done that, and this placeholder of the parent journey allows them to stay connected to their own experience and then also be able to support a parent based on where that particular parent is in their own journey. In that parent journey, we use that as a tool for understanding, not for a movement of where we think parents should be. So we're not trying to pull them along the journey into a different stage. And the parent journey also just allows for language of connection, even if the parent partner and the parent are at different stages of their parent journey. And I think another important placeholder is for the idea of self-care. Many times we've talked about this a little earlier too, that there are unique stressors for families who have children with emotional, behavioral, mental health challenges. And that doesn't go away when a peer-parent support partner enters into the workforce. So it's a placeholder for themselves in terms of self-care, but it's also an opportunity for peer-parent support partners to help parents work on their own self-care and well-being issues. And then again, in terms of the pearls, it really just sets the stage for peer-parent support to be reliable and consistent. It's a great foundation that can actually be building connection in any setting. And it allows the peer-parent support to stay intentional in delivering support regardless of tasks or requirements that are program specific. And again, it's just an easy framework that people can memorize. So Ted, I think this is you.
Okay, I think it is too. I'm trying to follow along here. So again, the takeaway is you can't just link peer parent support and wraparound without being thoughtful about it, the fact that they're both complex. Part of the work for allies and leaders, as well as peer parent support providers, is how do you build system-wide knowledge and appreciation of both the wraparound process and peer-based support, especially as it relates to parents. Because it's complex to create space to support parents for what they're going through, rather than as a means to an end to produce a better outcome for children. I think the second thing is, for those of you that are working in wraparound projects, wraparound has a way of expanding the task list, and it feels like it feels like it doesn't matter how much you do, there's always more to do in wraparound. And so what can happen is we get so focused on wraparound that we overlook the power of peer parent support and may end up diluting it. So we have to be mindful about that. It doesn't, that we see that as a common kind of issue. I think that the other thing that can happen is we can co-opt the role of support into other activities. And we start to think about support as a means to an end rather than support as a powerful healer in and of itself. It's that example, and peer-parent partners will talk about this a lot, where they end up being expected to be the super engagement specialist for a parent who's going through something in order to get them on board with what we're trying to do. And you'll see the idea of the parent whisperer on the next, that you become this magical unicorn in the field, and we're not doing a good job of connecting with the parents, so we'll send a peer-parent support partner out. The other thing that happens in wraparound, because you created a table where everybody's bringing their own opinion to it, we can end up with all kinds of different arguments, or whose side are you on, and the truth is that our own bias and disagreement can come up whether or not you have lived experience or you come to the work from a different point of view. Our own bias can creep up, and in particular in wraparound, that can feel more expanded because we're spending more time trying to collaborate with each other around what to do next. So those are some of the challenges that we see as we move forward. But I want you to know that all hope is not lost. There are some benefits to peer-parent support and wraparound. The first is that families who are in a wraparound are likely to have a large support need, since the system has not worked out so well in the past. I think we might be missing a word there. Typically families don't get to wraparound because the first response was very successful. They tend to get there because the first system's response was less than successful. And so it is a reasonable assumption to assume that any family that enters wraparound is going to have a parent who would benefit by having very skilled peer-parent support available. I think the second thing is that it can increase parent insight, competence, competence, and empowerment. What do we mean by that? What we mean is by connecting with someone, and we've all seen this happen, when two peers connect and the parent recognizes that their peer has a story that they can relate to, what starts to happen is you start to feel less restricted by your story, which can associate with confidence that it's not just you, which then gives you enough confidence to try something that's likely to work for your family, which at the end of the process, we hope, leads to this sense of empowerment. I can drive the bus rather than having the bus drive over me. The other benefit is that peer-parent support partners are often the biggest supporters of wraparound. They find a home there. I know of a number of communities where parents and peer-parent partners have been responsible in many cases for saving wraparound because they see the promise of it. Even if it's not terribly well implemented, parents will keep it happening. I think it also increases the capacity for parents and professionals to truly hear and understand each other. So we don't run the risk of, quote unquote, handling a parent in our hope to create our wraparound plans And it's busting bias for folks that have worked in wraparound without having peer-parent support partners as part of it, and those that have. What they talk about is they start to be able to see the world and carry with them as an ally the view of the parent as they move forward. The next question for you to think about is, are you prepared to unhitch peer-parent support from wraparound? Can you really think about peer-parent support as a standalone thing, not as an extension of wraparound, but as a powerful thing in and of itself? The second question is, how do you build a model for peer-parent support? That it's not as simple as hiring somebody who has the title parent in their job title, but there's a big idea about what does peer-parent support look like, and what can you expect from it, and what types of training are you offering? And that goes on both sides. I think, as we spent a lot of time talking about peer-parent support and how you train them, but the truth of the matter is, if you're going to hire peer-parent support as part of wraparound, you've also got to train and prepare the wraparound staff to understand their responsibility in building that strong alliance. And so, Tony, anything you want to add to that?
No, it looks like we had some questions, Pat, that are up. Nikki, I don't know how you want to start addressing them. Do we start from the top down, or how would you like to do that?
I think we should start from the top down, because if I asked the first question and we never got to it, I'd probably be frustrated. So what's the first question?
So the first question is, how are professional, let's see, that's the first question. Let me just make sure.
Somebody asked if we talk about peer-parent support as a standalone, and indicated their community is moving away from that. And how do we manage that under Medicaid guidelines for standalone services?
So when I was referring to a standalone service, I was pretty much talking about it in terms of not being an extension of wraparound, or being able to exist within any other child serving system or program. So for instance, in work that I was doing in California, their peer-parent support program was part of, it was separate and distinct from the wraparound project, but they worked together. So there wasn't a need for an additional assessment in those kind of situations. But it's really just the idea of being able to pull peer-parent support out from underneath an existing project, or we're also seeing peer-parent support in juvenile justice. We did that in Arizona. We did a pilot project with that. We're in residential treatment facilities where we actually trained and hired a peer-parent support partner to work with the RTC, and they were actually hired by the RTC. And so there's just multiple ways that peer-parent support could exist as a service within the larger service system. And Pat, if you want to add anything to that, feel free to do so.
Yeah, well, a number of states have written their Medicaid plans to include peer support, or peer support - parents, peer support - youth. So when we say standalone, I think we mean standalone from wraparound, because in states where they've done that, there still is a need for a clinical assessment. And if you're going to be the only service being offered besides some kind of clinical oversight, then that speaks to some structure the peer-parent partner needs to have built into what they do, which is they probably need to have a plan, they need to have a set of expectations for delivering and getting the outcome they hope to, and a way to meet with that supervising clinician to all this. So what's the next question?
I'd be interested in learning about different tools or activities to use or do with parents. Tina, one of the things that we did also in Arizona is we developed some tools that we thought would be helpful for families in terms of identifying natural supports, and we also would work with them in terms of stress, doing a life balance wheel where they could actually visualize where they would pick 6 or 7 domains of their life and then rate that on a scale of 1 to 10 and then connect all those dots together. And ideally, you would see something that looked like a round shape. And if it wasn't round, there was actually a visual there for the parent to say, you know, you're right, I really do need to focus more on self-care. And sometimes until they can actually visualize it, they think that that's something that they can wait and do later. We also did some around the life domains and just help families rate where they are in terms of life domains, whether it be financial, social, and depending on where they are on that, we also use that tool to begin talking about transition. So if you're interested in more of those kind of ideas, I'd be happy to share them later on. Pat, did you have anything you want to say around some tools?
Oh, Tony's got a lot of tools. I mean, the big thing for us, I think, has been using the parent journey and the Pearl structure as a framework to hang those tools on and create some kind of purpose, so that it doesn't feel like we're simply doing work to do work, that it has to be anchored in kind of where we're at. So that's been, all of those tools start to hang by those two frameworks. That also gets to, I think, the next question, which is around professional boundaries addressed for PPSC. And that was kind of tricky because you don't expect a peer support partner's boundaries to be the same as, say, a clinician's boundaries. And so it is a tricky thing to try to manage that. For example, you can't hire people and say, we hired you because of your personal lived experience, and then say, don't take anything personally, because that's why we hired them. And so a couple of thoughts that I've seen projects do is that over time they look to develop a career ladder so that one of the peer parent partners is in kind of a lead role, because sometimes some sites find it very helpful to have a peer be in that kind of role, where Tony spent the last several years in Arizona. One of the ways that they did that is by having the family organization do some of the consultation with the peers, no matter where they were employed, in order to kind of manage some of those things. But you've got to think about what your structure is for managing boundaries and move away from, well, you can't do this because we don't do this, and really think through what do you want and need this peer to be and do, because it is going to be a different type of relationship.
Okay, it looks like the next question, do any organizations offer PTSD clinical supervision or regular contact with their own psychosocial therapy? So, I can speak from my experience in Arizona. Our family support organization was also a licensed outpatient clinic that we had clinical supervision. And in tandem with that, we also had group coaching. So we had clinical oversight by a clinical director under the requirements for us to be able to bill Medicaid. But in addition to that, we also had coaching available where our program managers and leadership staff really worked with the PPSPs to be able to help them really feel proficient in their role, to help them build skill, and then also as a placeholder for doing some boundary and ethics work. So in our trainings, we address boundaries, and as Pat said, they look very different, but they are still under ethical guidelines. And I do believe FREDLA has also created a document that talks about ethical guidelines in peer parent support that might be helpful to others. Pat, is there anything else you wanted to say about that?
Well, the other plug I want to put in is that if you are working at an agency that has an employee assistance program, I would really encourage you to make sure that part of your resources for employee assistance include people with lived experience. So, you know, you may have a full cohort of a range of counseling options available for staff, but it's a particular type of need that you might find both youth peers and adult peers and parent peers have. And so I would encourage you to broaden your smorgasbord of EAP services to at least have one or two that can address the experience of having lived through this, and they'll be working as part of the system.
Okay, the next question. Go ahead, Pat.
Well, I think, go ahead. I was going to go there, but you're good.
What types of training opportunities are available? We have one family navigator in our system of care who is not part of a pre-existing parent peer support agency. And, you know, this is a difficult question to answer because I think it varies in all different kinds of places. So we do have, and I think there are several different organizations that provide peer parent support training. I'm not sure what state you're actually in. In the state of Arizona, we provided peer parent support training, and our service providers, our community agency providers would send their family support partners or peer parent support partners to our site for training. So they were trained, we were the training center for that particular role. Over the last several years, agencies have actually developed their own training within those sites and have been delivering their own peer parent support training. I also believe FREDLA has training curriculum, and many of the family support organizations within a variety of different states offer training for peer parent support partners.
The other thing I would suggest for that one person is to help facilitate them finding a best friend from a community like this that they could stay in touch with, because it's hard to be the only one. The next question is about, we are looking for boundaries training and safe speech when talking to families. There are a number of trainings available, and on both parent peer and youth peer and adult peer around some of the boundaries kind of work. It's a fairly specific question, and so part of what I would encourage the person asking the question to do is to really think about what they're trying to address with that because it is so specific. And we see this all the time where parents that we've hired can get into things that may make the larger system uncomfortable for good reasons. And, you know, because when we hire people because it's personal and they take it personally, stuff can happen. But there are a number of places you can go. Tony's already given those resources that folks have around how that looks. The other thing I would say is you make the same trainings available that you would for all of your staff or peers, but you may need to customize it in terms of some of the examples.
So Nicole, have we addressed all the questions that came up in the presentation?
We have one more question from Joanne. Do you have any suggestions for helping organizations move from viewing family involvement the same, from viewing family involvement the same as parent peer support?
You want to take that, Tony?
Yeah, I can start, Pat, and then feel free to join in. Joanne, it's an interesting question because I think we even struggled with this early on in Arizona, where if you hired a family member within the organization and they were in the role of a trainer, say, they viewed that as family involvement, as well as peer-parent support. And, in terms of helping somebody move from family involvement to peer support is, a paid formal service where the role is designed to intentionally help another parent on their particular journey, where family involvement activities could be things like sitting on a board within your program. There was a time when I worked in New Jersey where we had a contract with a mobile crisis unit, and we actually trained family members to sit on some of the mobile responses, different meetings. And so they often gave their perspective there. So I think when you're thinking about program design, you're wanting feedback on things, getting families involved in activities within your organization, sitting on boards or committees. Those are family involvement activities, where peer-parent support is really focused on providing support to the family member. So I think, part of it is distinguishing between the two and then asking the question, do you believe peer-parent support is a service that you should be offering to your families? Pat, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, yeah. So I think that question probably is a marketing question, and I think it's who we're going to market to. I think we got to set the stage for a culture shift. And I think, we have rolled these things out at about the same time with often program administrators or directors. I think we've got to go after how do we market the idea of family involvement as fundamental to doing work. And I think one of the ways to do that is to market that to funders and market it to boards. If I said I want to run a service agency, but I don't want to keep records, I don't want to have a health record, people would say, well, that's impossible. I would argue that a health record and family involvement are much the same kind of infrastructure. And so we've got to start marketing to some different players to make family involvement being a component of good care and one of the things that gets monitored. So I think we've got to, and then I think we've got to think about how do we use the words around that, how do we create methods so that people can really move past the idea that family involvement is just a concept rather than a set of practical steps that need to be in place. And then I think there's another question around any suggestions for building a family's informal support in the wraparound process. Many families may be displaced, new to the community, have no extended family, or feel uneasy talking about their family to others. In my mind, there is no doubt that having a peer-parent partner can associate with an increased ability to build an informal support network. There is a danger, however, which is when you connect with another peer who's a parent, you can get so comfortable with that peer that you don't go back to the hard work of how do you extend your support network. One of the things that has to happen is we need to help peer parents find some tools so that they can really monitor and measure whether or not their presence is associating with extending somebody's support system on their own terms. I think, and I understand that in Wraparound, the biggest complaint I ever hear from people is, I don't know how to get extended support at the table. Family doesn't want people in their business, is usually either the first or the second thing people talk about. Having a peer who has learned how to create their own meaning, who's been on that parent journey, and they may not be in stage 4 or 5 today, but they've been on stage 4 or 5, they've found a way to build the right size support system, not only for themselves, but for everybody in their family, because family recovery is something parents have to worry about. And so part of what we want to do is we want to start to monitor, is the presence of the peer-parent partner associating with the parent having more options to create their own extended support? And if it's not, how do we change the activities that the peer-parent partner is doing? The second thing that folks do, and I've seen Tony do, is they also use the opportunity to connect parents with one another in that context to build some alternative support mechanisms so that people don't feel like they're the only one with that story. Tony, if you want to add anything more to that. Tony? So it looks like the last question then is specific models that you use for documenting in an EHR for parent-peer support. I don't have a frame around that. I think people are working on that at different times. I do think that we want to, in the documentation, really be clear that the heading for parents in this context is around support, not around a service, which I know can be tricky in a Medicaid kind of world, but we want to say what are the support activities they're doing, and how do we document and measure those in a way that keeps the spirit of peer support without turning it into more of a service orientation.
You know, Pat, I would just add to that. So in Arizona, in our billing of Medicaid, we ask our parent partners, so we have a database that we use, but we ask our parent partners to really write down exactly, you know, how they interacted with the parent, but part of the way to tie that in to Medicaid is how did that support benefit the child. So if it was a parent going to family education to learn more skills on parenting, and they talked, the family support partner supported them with that and helped them practice, they would write that down, that they took the skills from the parenting class and practiced and role played with the parent, and that'll benefit the child by improving the parent-child relationship. So as long as you can tie it back to the identified child and write your specific support activities, I think that is crucial. I think even over the past 25 years that peer-parent support has been evolving, what we haven't been able to do really well is document the benefits of that. I mean, we're getting more and more documentation over the years, but seeing how peer-parent support benefits, if we're not documenting that even in our progress notes, it will be difficult to be able to show the benefits of that long-term for systems.
That's a good point, Tony. That's one of the biggest complaints around documentation, or challenges around documentation I hear from folks, is that the peer-parent partner is able to get these tools and experience the system from the parent's point of view. But then when you cross-reference it over to what the child's unique experience going through the system is, can be a bit of a challenge. And so I think we have burdened parent partners with having to do that integration, and I think we need our clinical and program staff to work collaboratively to come up with a way around that. So it doesn't feel like you do all this great work and then you have to go back and say something that relates back to that goal that turns on billing. And then with that, I think we might be done with our questions, are we?
I don't see any more questions. We do have a bit of time left, so if anyone has additional questions, please go ahead and post in that public chat right now. We'll go ahead and give it a few more moments for folks to post any questions that they may have. And if not, we are free to wrap up early. So let's give it a few more moments. I do want to encourage folks to stay connected to take a brief TA Network survey for us once we end. So please stay connected. But we'll give it a few more moments, another minute or so, for folks to post any questions that they may have. I see some folks are typing, so we may have a few questions coming through. If folks do want to leave the room a little early, I would ask that you please click on the link in the public chat box to take a brief TA Network survey. But for the rest of us, if you can stay connected until we do end the presentation so that you can also get that survey as well. So Pat and Tony, I do think that we are okay to end today, and I'll let you go ahead and give the closing remarks before we close out today. Thank you so much.
You want to start, Tony?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
She wants some closing remarks.
Oh,
I can do it. Yeah, let me try it. Okay, so here's my wrap up. I believe that if you're doing peer parent support and wraparound, they're both very complicated. They are, and they both are on some level looking very simple, but they are extraordinarily complex. By mixing the two together, I think any leader, ally, connector needs to really think through the unique roles of both of them and recognize that nurturing and rolling each of those things out could be a full-time avocation. I do think that when you link them together with purpose, you get better results. But I think if you link them together without purpose, you can get some untoward consequences. And so if there's anything you've taken away from here, it's create some space to think about the power of peer parent support out from under the wraparound auspices and how you can nurture that at the same time that you're trying to roll out this complex thing we call wraparound. So that's my wrap up. What do you got, Tony?
I think I would just say, in addition to training, if you have the opportunity to have someone in terms of a career ladder supervise your peer parent partners who also has the lived experience of a parent or a caregiver can be really helpful in continuing to deepen the skill sets of the peer parent support partners. I also think coaching is extremely helpful. And so if the program manager focuses on developing skills in terms of coaching and uses supervision for more compliance-related tasks, that can also be really beneficial as well. And of course, then always more opportunities for self-reflection and really attending to self-care for this role, because these parent partners are also living their own experience while they're providing support to others.
Okay.
I guess we're ending.
Thank you for your attention.
Yes, thank you so much. Take care and have a wonderful day.